Good afternoon. Welcome to the Defense in Depth panel session, Advancing Acquisition Strategies for the Naval Enterprise, Innovation, Collaboration, and Pathways. At this time, I'd like to ask everybody to silence their phones. And as a reminder, once we conclude the panel, there is a mic here in the center. We will take questions from the audience. When you come up, please identify yourself and your affiliation, and please have a question. I have the pleasure of introducing the moderator of this panel, Mr. Noam Oz. Noam is Director of Innovation Operations at NavalX, the innovation arm of the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. There, he oversees efforts to quickly equip sailors and Marines with needed capabilities and coordinates efforts with innovation cells across the armed services. In addition to his corporate experience, Noam at Lockheed Martin and Naval, Mr. Oz has dedicated more than 15 years as a DoD civilian serving in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, and Naval Sea Systems Command. It is my pleasure to turn over the microphone to Mr. Noam Oz.
Thank you very much, Adam. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this discussion on advancing acquisition strategies. Before we introduce the rest of the esteemed panel here, just get a sense of the audience here in the room. So by show of hands, how many of you are currently working within the Department of Defense, either in uniform, as a civilian, or as a direct support contractor? Okay, high majority. How many of you are contractors in the sense of working as a defense contractor with contracts either active now or in the past? Okay, excellent. And how many of you have never had a contract direct with the DoD and are hoping to get into the game? Okay, excellent. So nice to have representation across the board. This panel discussion should address concerns for all of you and hopefully add value to every single one of you. So Adam gave my introduction, so I will spare you my background and just identify that or highlight that NavalX is really focused on as being the at the forefront of naval innovation, and we are dedicated to cultivating the innovation ecosystem across the Department of the Navy and ensuring that we are advancing the capabilities and the technologies that our sailors and Marines require. We do that through robust tech scans, connecting between solution providers and stakeholders across the naval enterprise, and then facilitating pathways that accelerate the development and transition of the capabilities that directly address the Department of the Navy's needs. We also have a robust and broad tech bridge network that serves as a front door for new entrants into the naval enterprise. Directly to my left here is Captain Alex Campbell. Alex, I'll turn it over to you for intro.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Noam. I'm Captain Alex Campbell. I'm the Maritime Portfolio Director at the Defense Innovation Unit based in Mountain View, California. The Defense Innovation Unit works across the services and works across the department to rapidly prototype and adapt commercial technologies for defense use cases, and then rapidly work with the services to field those capabilities, really with a focus on, like I said, adapting the best of and the cutting edge commercial technologies that exist today that are already mature or maturing, and then finding a way to get those in the hands of warfighters in the most lightweight way, and then working with the services from a resource perspective and from a program perspective to make sure that the services are able to catch those and field and scale those in a seamless way from sort of beginning to end of the life cycle of a product. Thanks.
Matt?
Thanks, Noam. Matthew Culp, I'm not an active captain. I recently retired, so I have not been recalled to active duty yet. So I recently retired back in August. My role for the past about 5 years was in the Pentagon. I was the strategic advisor to Admiral Gilday, who was the CNO at the time, and then I did the transition team for Admiral Franchetti. So worked strategy for a number of years for both of the two CNOs. One of my main projects towards the end of Admiral Gilday's time and into Admiral Franchetti's was a project called Pathmaker, which was how can we look at transitioning really disruptive technologies from prototype to scale inside of the execution year. And that project led to a lot of lessons learned, just kind of navigating inside the Pentagon and trying to understand the dynamics between requirements and acquisitions in the fleet, and also kind of Congress and the budget itself. Huge learning experience for me. But that ultimately led to the stand-up an office called Disruptive Capabilities Office. And so partly I'm here just to kind of share some of the lessons learned for that. And then when I retired, I wanted to kind of put my money where my mouth was and try to help get a small company to become a big company. So I left DoD and I joined a company called Naval Labs, which is a first-party data collect and artificial intelligence company working with DoD.
Well, I'm the least qualified here in this panel, but I'll keep it short. Serial entrepreneur, 11 exits, 3 unicorns, 2 IPOs. That just means I'm a glutton for punishment. My area of expertise has been building companies that are mission-oriented, mission-focused. So a lot of my products are actually in your guys' ships and various constellations up in space. My area of expertise has really been doing corporate innovation projects that don't get written off, right? Like at the end of the day, what's the mission? The mission is sacred. What are you doing? Why should anybody care, for that matter? And then identifying pathways, if you will, to be able to get the right tool at the moment of relevance to where it needs to be.
Excellent. Thank you all. So today's conversation is going to be focused primarily on collaboration, innovation pathways, and the introduction of small businesses. So we'll jump right in. So first question to Alex. DIU has established innovation pathways that enable non-traditional companies to engage with the DoD. Can you share how these pathways complement what DIU is doing and highlight other pathways DIU offers?
Yeah, of course, Noam, thanks. Just show of hands, anyone have a sense of what makes you a non-traditional versus a prime? Oh yeah, no, I'll take it. What do you got? So no. Is that? Well, I'm just going to do it because it's hard to hear. Sorry, I should not have called the audible of asking the audience. It's whether or not you have a cost accounting system that is compliant with DoD and federal regulations, which is sort of a weird way to define traditional and non-traditional companies, right? And the reason that I bring that up is because when you're accelerating bringing non-traditional companies into the Department of Defense ecosystem, one of the reasons that you're doing that is because they have new novel technology that they probably built at a rapid pace with a lean sort of point of view and operating model. And the last thing that we want to do is force those small companies to then go hire a dozen folks to go create a cost accounting system that is compliant with DoD regulations. Because that overhead doesn't serve to build the capability, doesn't serve to accelerate the capability into warfighters' hands. I'm not here to tell you that cost plus is bad or that firm fixed price is good, but these are important things to consider when you look at how small business integrates and does work with the Department of Defense. So to answer Noam's actual question, what are the pathways that DIU uses? And the primary one that we use is called a commercial solutions opening, which was largely pioneered by the Defense Innovation Unit back in the 2016 or so timeframe. Now other organizations within the DoD use that commercial solutions opening process. Some of those are based in the FAR and some of those are not. And really what that entails is a very lightweight, a relatively agile, and a fast mechanism to take a warfighter problem, to curate it, to go through the diligence to make sure that there's a commercial technology or capabilities that are mature or maturing that can solve for that warfighter problem, and then launch a layman's terms solicitation or RFP. We call it an area of interest. And then over the course of usually less than 90 days, sometimes up to 120, we go through a competitive down selection process that again is simplified. And then we award other transaction agreements. Other transactions agreements are a simplified contracting mechanism that are outside of the FAR and create a pathway that is much more akin to contracting that is done in commercial industry outside of the Department of Defense, and therefore the barriers to entries are very low. We then proceed, once those contracts are awarded, with prototyping that capability directly with the end user, directly with the customer, working hand in hand with program offices and resource sponsors, so that over a course of 12 to 18 to 24 months, as that prototype matures, we get to be able to make a fielding decision. And because, at the very beginning, we worked with those resource sponsors and programmers and, the team in OpNav N8, sir? ideally, we're able to catch those things in a responsible way so that they don't fall into the valley of death, right? It's very important to have it sort of end to end. So that's the primary pathway that we use in very short. We've had a fair bit of success, bringing in small companies and bringing in medium-sized companies, and really doing the important work of integrating those technologies directly with end users to build the product and to do it really fast. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. Matt, so based on your experience supporting the CNO's Pathmaker in the past and then the establishment of DCO, could you offer your perspective on novel or innovative pathways?
Absolutely. So I'm going to save my bragging on DIU and their incredible partnership because I've seen the future questions in advance. But as far as the pathways goes, I think sometimes we have the question, how can we innovate better inside of the DoD? And I think really the truth is we really do not have an innovation problem inside the Navy, inside DoD. There is a ton of innovation going on. There is a ton of pathways. There's a ton of money for small companies to experiment, to work alongside the warfighters, and to come up with really incredible prototypes. Really, the challenge is that we don't have an innovation problem, we have an adoption problem. And in a really healthy ecosystem, you'd have these companies being able to prototype and experiment, and we get better and better and better, and we down select to the absolute right things. And then those right things would make it through the Pentagon and be funded, and then those few answers would be populated as many things going out to the fleet. And in fact, what we have, so sort of a two-sided funnel with lots of things going in that are different, and then lots of things going out that have now been scaled. So making it from prototype to scale. And in fact, what we see is almost all of the activity is on that left side of the funnel, and not enough stuff is making it through the Valley of Death inside the Pentagon. The good news is that, first of all, we have incredible leaders like Admiral Skillman here who understand how to move the money. We have leadership inside the Navy that are trying to push that and push the needle to do things like scale robotic and unmanned systems and artificial intelligence faster. And I think we continue to learn lessons. And there's mechanisms, things like AppFit, that do help us to accelerate the procurement of innovative technologies with what we like to call sort of OPM or other people's money, where we can sort of leverage sort of pots of money that allows you to kind of bridge that valley of death with money that you didn't actually necessarily have to budget for. So we're making strides in the right direction through some of these innovative pathways. I think we have a long way to go, but I think with the navigation plan, really the past two versions has really put a premium on making sure we innovate faster. There's some cultural things we need to overcome inside the Pentagon, and there's clearly some incentive structures inside the Pentagon that we need to address so that the folks who are actually making the decisions on requirements and acquisitions and moving the money are incentivized to go in that direction away from legacy.
Thanks, Matt. Dijon, your background highlights work with AI, XR, and venture studios. How do you see these technologies driving innovation pathways for defense applications?
Certainly. We're able to iterate more quickly and more cheaply, to be honest with you. When you can use augmented reality to design a rocket, for example, and you can explode it, expand it, and take a look at it, you're able to collaboratively work with people, not just in your location, but remotely. So you're able to digitally twin and create solutions to problems more quickly, more cheaply, and frankly, more elegantly and more robustly. I think AI is a fancy way of saying you've programmed a software application to give you insight at a velocity that otherwise you wouldn't have necessarily. Take large language models, for example, and analyzing documents. But I think what it really does is it gives you superpowers. It gives you the ability to screw up. I'd like to say a venture studio somewhere between Skunkworks and Mythbusters. Shout out to both of you guys. And I really think the difference between messing around and science is you write everything down in science, right? So venture studio is a way to demystify things, and it's a way to be a little bit more scientific and smart and intelligent about being able to drive innovation. And innovation is really just solve the problem, let's call it 30% more efficiently than is currently being done, so that it justifies the cost of what you're doing.
So based on some of the successes you all have seen across the board, what would you like to see shift in the defense acquisition system in order to scale some of these successes more broadly? And we'll start with Alex.
So I was on a panel earlier, and a question like this came up, and the answer sort of repeatedly was culture. But how do you define culture? How do you change culture? How do you create the incentives to change And so the one thing that I think that I'd like to see, because changing all of culture in one swing probably isn't particularly realistic, is change the incentive structures around. I talked about this a second ago. How we think about contracting and how we think about contracting with smaller, potentially more innovative companies. And how we change the incentive structure around how we think about that, right? So a lot of contracts that are done, especially in the research and development, and sometimes in the production and procurement side of things, are cost or cost plus other types of cost contracts. And that doesn't really fit with the business model of a lot of these smaller companies, nor does it fit with the business model of the capital that funds these companies and causes them to exist in the first place. And that's a non-trivial component to this ecosystem, is bringing in that capital and creating an environment where companies can thrive off of business models that are based on those non-DoD capital infusions. It's a really big deal to grow the defense industrial base and to grow this ecosystem. So in order to cause all of those sort of dominoes to fall into place, you need to create contracting mechanisms that fit with that, and oftentimes those are firm fixed price contracts. And firm fixed price contracts really push most of the risk onto those companies and onto their venture-backed entities. And I think that's okay from a DoD perspective, especially when you look at how cost contracts often put most of the risk onto the government in terms of having to pay when there's cost overruns or when there's technical challenge and those sorts of things. So the thing that I would want to change most about pathways is to train and educate and help our existing contracting workforce do ride-alongs in the world of OTAs, other transactional agreements, and firm fixed price contracts, so that they can sort of see things through a different lens and understand how things can be done differently, not at the expense of doing fewer cost contracts, but so that that workforce and those teams have a really good sense of both sides of that coin. And I think that'll go a long way towards creating opportunity for these smaller and mid-sized companies that are really well suited to do firm fixed price contracting through these innovation pathways, to absorb a lot of the risk for the government in development, but ultimately drive competition and, like I said, increase the overall size of the defense industrial base. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. Matt?
I'd add a +1 on looking at the incentive structures inside the system to make sure that people are, in fact, incentivized to move money away from legacy programs that may be theirs to defend, but moving it to things with greater warfighting value. That said, so shifting away from incentives, I think there's a couple things culturally that are worthwhile thinking through. And one of them is, I think, just culturally, DoD for a long time, I think, has acted as if DoD is essentially the leader in R&D and innovation. And for a long time, DoD really was. I mean, a lot of the great advances in our research and development came from DoD back in sort of the 50s, 60s. But that really has shifted largely to the private sector. And I think culturally inside DoD, there still are pockets that believe that no, innovation needs to live inside DoD. And so I think there are areas where we should shift focus away and recognize, hey, private sector probably is the place that should be leading the efforts on things like artificial intelligence, software, robotics, things that truly have sort of dual use applications. And DoD money for R&D probably should be focused more on specific DoD problems. And culturally, I think if DoD could learn to be a better partner with industry and then essentially a fast follower, we would go a long way to solve some of those issues. And then partly it's the way we're structured, where I think inside DoD, we do a thing we call requirements-based capability development, where we say, we have a problem, therefore I need this thing that can do A, B, and C. Therefore, industry, please go build the thing that does A, B, and C. And I think we're learning through things like partnerships with DIU and the OTA system, is that you can switch that and you can do capabilities-based requirements, meaning that I can share a problem with industry and say, look, I have this problem, and now I can have a whole suite of solutions that then can compete in all kinds of different ways to solve that problem, and I can compete solutions and then write the requirement at the end. I think we're learning to get there, and we're learning to do that, but again, I think realigning incentives to support that better and better is would go a long way.
Thanks. And from a VC perspective?
Yeah, totally. I think it takes a closer collaboration. All truth be told, you guys can be a little intimidating sometimes. Like, it's just the truth, right? A lot of my colleagues are like, this is scary stuff, right? If we screw up, you guys die. I mean, damn, nothing gets more serious than that. So I think close collaboration, I think also building relationships and learning each other's cultures are key. You know, this is me dressed up. More of the time, I'm wearing a t-shirt, sandals, and you think I look homeless or a hipster. But at the end of the day, it's managing my cognitive load to be able to adequately address what I'm trying to do, right? And so if you tell me you need rapid capabilities to do X, Y, and Z, we wrap our head around the problem, but it's asymmetrical thinking, right? We're looking from the outside in, you're looking from the inside out. I'm wearing a blue jacket, but you know, I'm just looking at you guys. You're looking at my jacket. The point of the story is we all have different perspectives. We all have different points of views. We all have different vantages to the same problem. And I think more often than not, what happens is we get lost in translation. I believe that if we have closer collaboration and demystify one another and actually get to learn one another, by the time the S hits the proverbial fan, we already know how to talk to one another and collaborate. And I think that closer collaboration, that relationship building, that learning each other cultures is what's going to lead to the capabilities that are going to exceed or meet your requirements.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I think we've seen across the board that there really is a matter, when we talk about culture, a lot of times it's a matter of personalities. And the conversation focuses on risk and how much risk is an entity in a position of resourcing or adoption willing to take, and managing that risk discussion with some nuance in terms of ensuring that the operators can manage their risk, while the acquisition system and the requirements drafters can manage their respective risk, and then figure out how we can talk through it so that we can manage that risk and accept more risk up front in the R&D realm, so that we reduce the programmatic risk when it finally does get adopted by the acquisition community, and that R&D can inform what those requirements should actually look like through an iterative capability development process. So we've mentioned a few different pathways already. At NavalX, we facilitate a variety of pathways. Some of them are prize challenges that can lead to follow-on production, OT, other transaction agreement contracts. Alex mentioned other transaction authorities. The Don Sibber program offers a variety of opportunities to apply for topics. There are cooperative research and development agreements, or CRADAs, that offer an opportunity for technology that has yet to be matured to leverage the capabilities afforded by certain naval laboratories, and have that data exchange, speaking back to the cultural exchange and understanding the different perspectives. And I know, so we also have a few other opportunities. So for those who are familiar with the InQtel work programs, we've exercised that a few times, as well as collaborated with DIU on some CSOs. So I understand, Matt, in your private sector role, you have had the opportunity to look at it from that lens in terms of how to collaborate with DIU and go from a CSO into a follow-on contract. And so if you could expound upon that and offer some insight into how that was from the outside looking in.
Absolutely. I mean, so I think this is one of the big success stories of where I've seen really on the outside of what right really does look like, and what an incredible pathway DIU has helped create through these partnerships with industry, through providing a really good front door for industry to talk through, and through CSOs. So Vannevar Labs has won basically 2 CSOs at this point, so relatively small company. You've only been around about 5 years. But for a small company, that opportunity to understand, hey, look, the services have a problem. They have this capability gap. They've put out this commercial systems opening, looking for solutions, and then being able to compete for that, get down selected, and then have some level of funding to be able to then continue to prototype. But really the great thing about that is that, you know, just knowing what a problem is really only half the battle. Ideally, what you want is be able to partner alongside warfighters to say, hey, look, let me iterate on this problem alongside not someone with, someone who's very smart, but inside the Pentagon, but someone who truly is dealing with that problem every single day. And I think that's where some of these CSOs and OTAs really give you the opportunity. So winning a prototype OTA, Vannevar has done that on 2 occasions, which has given us the opportunity to really rapidly iterate. And unlike a requirement where you have, hey, no, you're just going to build this thing, a prototype OTA basically just gives you, hey, this is a problem, and we can iterate and over and over and over again and make it better and better and better. And so from that, you have that opportunity to A, work alongside warfighters, and then B, create capabilities that you can then transition to a production OT, and then really, take the best of breed of those innovations, and then, go to production. So for a small company, that type of opportunity through organizations like DoD is phenomenal. And so I could not say enough about the partnership that we have had with DIU and about that opportunity. So it's, I think, one of the great success stories of how DoD is doing this right, and the value of prototype OTs to really allow us to move fast.
Excellent. Thank you for that insight, Matt. So Dijon, as a VC who's investing in companies that are eager to get into the defense sector, what can the DoD learn and adopt in terms of best practices from a VC perspective? You spoke about culture and how we need to effectively learn each other's approaches and how we approach and tackle problems and solution sets. What can we learn from you all?
Certainly, I'd say iterate a lot. Get used to failing. Frankly, VC, I hate to say this, but we VC sometimes are dumb because we have to follow FOMO, right? And so when you get rid of that, right, and you're actually paying attention to the companies that really drive in real innovation, not just because somebody told you to cut them a check, I think the definition of success becomes pretty standardized in the sense of like we have to go through certain phases of iteration, right? Seed funding, okay, I have an idea. You might call that an SBIR 1. I'll give you 50K to 150K. That's your seed funding, maybe 350K. I'll own X% of your company. But then in reality, it's like a marriage, right? Like once I give you money, like you have to do what I say you're gonna do. And I have, as an operator, I have to do what the investors say or the customers say we're gonna do. So getting to understand those different iteration challenges, getting to realize that, to be radically honest with you, it takes money to make money. So having, I would say, Silicon Valley partner up through things like Office of Strategic Capital is a perfect example, right? If you're able to de-risk deep tech for me as an investor, then I'm more likely to cut a check for someone building your advanced materials that you could use for that fancy new chip that you might need for an antenna or a drone or a computer. So I think what DoD can do more closely is, frankly, more Office of Strategic Capital type programs, private capital like SOCOM type programs that allow us to build that connective tissue, to get to know your culture, to demystify certain aspects of our mutual endeavors, if you will, and then subsequently have that tribal knowledge of who to go to when you need to due diligence something, right? Like the back channel is our friend in venture capital. More often than not, most of the deals get done through the back channel. It's no joke, sometimes you close the deal in a coffee shop or a fast food restaurant because you've taken the time to get to know the person. But that happens through iterations, right? Getting to know at the seed stage, at the Series A stage, not just when someone's, frankly, on the Wall Street Journal because they're raising $500 billion. But that point's a little bit too late, to be brutally honest with you, because they're probably 10 to 15 years into their endeavor. Like, I hate to say it, like, at that point, they probably don't need you. And if they want you, it's going to be more expensive. So I think iterations, lots of iterations, is really what's key.
Excellent. So, Alex, with the launch of the Defense Innovation Community Event Teaser, the DICE, under DIU leadership, has emphasized the importance, really, of that cross-service collaboration and expediting relevant capabilities that apply to multiple services. Along with NavalX's and other DICE members' involvement, how have you seen this collaboration contribute to a cultural shift across the naval enterprise?
Yeah, no, thanks, Noam. So I think sometimes it's a mixed bag, right? I started working at DIU about 18 months ago, and one of the things that we kind of quickly identified is that you probably had a half a dozen different naval innovation-esque organizations doing things like traveling to Pac Fleet, independently understanding the problems that Pac Fleet had, coming back saying, well, we're going to solve all of Pac Fleet's problems. Attempting to find the resources to do that, find pathways to do that, and then slowly discovering over time, as the community of innovation teams got together, that that you'd all gone to Pac Fleet and that you'd all sort of ingested their problems and you were all trying to solve the same problems. And so that dysfunction isn't great. And I don't call that out to sort of, poke anyone in the chest and say you're doing it wrong. I think actually it's in because what happened afterwards, which is we changed. Right? We identified that we were doing it wrong. We identified dysfunction. And then instead of just keep doing it because it was in our parochial interest to do it for our own organizations, we became much more efficient and much more effective and much more collaborative in terms of sharing the problems that we were ingesting from the fleet, cross-talking them across the different organizations, right? Because NavalX has different sort of capabilities and authorities and resources than DIU does, than the Disruptive Capabilities Office does, than the Office of Naval Research has, right? And so when you put all those organizations together, you have a full toolbox, right? Versus, one team with a screwdriver and one team with a hammer. And so DIU, in its remit as advisor to the Secretary of Defense for innovation, established as Noam said, the Defense Innovation Community of Entities, which is a mechanism to bring together these organizations, not just practically, but also intellectually, so that we're able to identify the right problems together, identify the right tools and tool sets together, and then work collaboratively to solve them so that we're doing it in a unified way, bringing the best of our innovation community together in order to execute on that. So I think it's a big deal, and I think it's kind of like a pretty positive story that we went from some measure of dysfunction to, I think, some measure of function to solve the Navy's problems.
Thanks. And then, Matt, from your perspective, having worked with CNO Gilday and in the transition for CNO Franchetti, how would you say we can promote better collaboration internally?
So I think internally, one of the challenges is that I think, to be entirely honest, very few people completely understand the DoD acquisition system, from working with the fleets to establishing what the need is, working inside the requirement system to write the requirement, and then going to an acquisitions side to actually acquire that capability at the best cost, schedule, and performance. But it's an interesting model. When we did Pathmaker, I wish it had been me because it was a wonderful idea. But basically, we talked to a bunch of different groups from requirement side, the fleet side, and everybody said, "Hey, look, we know how to do this really fast. We can do this inside the execution year." But the problem is the other guys. So the Spider-Man meme where everyone is sort of pointing at each other. It was like that. And so the question was, well, how do we have this system where everybody says they know how to solve it, but it's not getting solved? And I think in the best analogy I heard was, wow, this sounds a lot like a Rubik's Cube. Everyone understands how to solve their side of the cube, but very few people understand how the entire thing needs to be manipulated to solve it inside the execution year. So I think the PPB process is complicated. There are rules for it, but I think if you try to short circuit it, it's complex, meaning there's a lot of interactions. And so to do it well, you need to create the interactions between the requirements community, the acquisitions community, the fleets, the budget people, and those connections honestly don't naturally exist inside the organization. So I think what we need to do better as an organization for the Navy or DoD writ large is really do a better job mapping our own internal systems and understand what is it the NavalX is doing, what is it the DCO is doing, what are the touch points inside of the 7, the 2, 6 for the resource sponsors, who are the program offices, because working on the outside and now, I know how to work it, but we've essentially tried to how to create that kind of human terrain maps ourselves as an organization because they honestly just don't exist inside a DoD. So I think that's where we can help create a bit of a cheat code for companies to understand if you're in this place, this is the human terrain that you should work with because it doesn't ever exist just with one office. If you want to do it fast, you need to create this relationships of folks across those different organizations.
Thanks. And now shifting to an external look and the introduction, the engagement with small businesses. So a lot of NavalX's focus is on the introduction of non-traditional and small businesses to tap into novel technology. It was said like the cutting edge technologies. There are certain areas in technology that are just better suited for the private sector to tackle and for there to be that partnership between the DoD and the private sector in a lead-follow partnership. But it's also to broaden the industrial base and introduce healthy competition directly in line with the CNO's Project 33 objective of putting more players on the field. And so along that line, We'll start out, this will be open for everyone, but Dijon, we'll start with you. How has the introduction of small businesses and new entrants into the defense sector enabled the acceleration of capability delivery?
Oh man, I think it's been awesome. Honestly, the idea that my friends and I mean, I'll tell you the truth. 10 years ago, we were just a bunch of nerds sitting at a coffee bean with 3 laptops. Like that was it. And we got our cage code, we got our SAM registration, and then we sold an AI solution that actually worked. And what I think it did for us is a couple of things. You hear me say this repeatedly, but it's the truth. We have to demystify what it's like to work with you. We have to demystify what it's like to be a VC. I used to be terrified of VCs 20 years ago. Truth be told, it took me a year and a half to raise my first check. Now I wake up in the mornings and there's inboxes full with like, hey, you want to spend my money on something? And the responsibility really comes down to create the connective tissue between private and small businesses, if you will, and the government, demystify the relationship, set proper expectations, and on our end, it's about building the operational excellence and the KPIs and the SMART goals, if you will, that are required based on the parameters that you set forth for the mission to be successful, right? That whatever that mission is, whatever that success looks like, what's the win condition, tell us, and we'll work backwards from that. And I think for us, it's about building that connective tissue and then subsequently deploying capital intelligently, right? VCs, we're not your friends. We're here to buy a profitable revenue stream. That's what we're here for, right? So that we can turn around and sell it, and we get paid based on how much, I guess, how little I paid for it and how much I sell it for, right? That's how we make the bulk of our cash. And the definition of success there is whatever I invest in has to actually work. And so I think being able to be clear on what the win condition is, being able to, as I said repeatedly, demystify, create that connective tissue, pull small businesses out of the mud, I think that's really one of the big key things that I would say take to succeed.
Great. And then, Matt, you spoke earlier about that two-sided funnel, right? And so there's the problem sets that go in, and then the solution sets, and that alignment between the two, and how do we get that across that bridge, right, in order to actually accelerate relevant capabilities at the pace of need. And so how have you seen that the introduction of new entrants, small businesses, and the collaboration between the multiple innovation cells across services have engaged those new entrants?
So I think we've taken the first few steps in the right direction to really start to expand that defense industrial base to include the innovation base. And I really do think it is existential, because I think we could all probably agree here that an industrial base fight versus an industrial base fight against the PRC is not the fight that the U.S. wants to be in. What we really would like to do is try to pivot that, and we would like to engage the innovation base. I think we can, as Admiral Kaler said this morning, I think no one builds software like the U.S. We are ahead in artificial intelligence. We are ahead on innovation. That's where the strength lies. And we have this enormous base out there of intellectual capital, of venture capital, that I think largely is untapped. And so, I think Admiral Franchetti wrote in the navigation plan, it's about getting more players on the field. That's not just about getting more ships and robots on the field at sea. It's about really getting more players on the field in the innovation base. And so for the small companies that are out there wanting to work for DoD, trying to break into the space, yes, it's horribly frustrating. DoD is hard to work for, hard to work with, but I say we, I guess they, now that I'm on the outside, there's a ton of effort to work closely and make that better. But I truly think this is an existential shift that we need to make, and ideally make it at a time of enormous pressure, but not actual crisis when we absolutely have to. But I think we're reaching that point where this shift needs to happen now. All that to say is I think that the people are in place, the leaders are in place. I think there's partnership with Congress and the new administration that needs to happen to be able to accelerate these pathways. And continuing resolutions are very hard. And so getting some kind of budget predictability is probably where we need to start.
Nice. And now at DIU, I mean, you've brought in a number of new entrants into the defense space from the commercial side. And so I'm interested in your take on this, as well as how you all measure success of these collaborations in achieving the timeliness of delivery of capabilities that are relevant.
Yeah. So I think when we think about small business, something that we see frequently is that there's just a different lens through which these smaller companies look at risk, potentially compared with a big defense prime. And in a lot of cases, these smaller companies, the contract that they're on is existential. That drives behaviors, it drives thoughts about risk, it drives thoughts about timeliness. In what we found to be, I think, a pretty differentiated way, and a way in which the government benefits from just like hardworking, scrappy companies. It's not to say that primes aren't hardworking. That's not the point. Really pushing the envelope and doing something different, and potentially because of the way that we provide problem statements and not requirements to these companies, that they're able to think about risk and then deliver capability, deliver novel solutions that we would have never gotten had we prescribed a requirement. So that relationship between problem statements and small business and the way that small businesses typically behave in this space is really, really powerful.
Great, thank you. So, Dijon, as you consider investing in some startups and up-and-coming companies with really novel capabilities, and you consider what the defense sector needs are, how do you assess where to apply those investments and how to bring on new entrants? And based on your experience, what are some of the roadblocks or the challenges that you have experienced from the DoD side that the DoD that we could collectively tackle or work with you in order to try to mitigate going forward?
Totally. So we're really systematic about this, and I'll shameless plug. We created something we call Systematic Ventures, and it's in essence, we build our own AI tool that allows us to look historically at what's succeeded and what's failed. Right? Most people don't talk about it, but there actually is a formula for success. If you're just a dude by yourself in a startup, you have 98% chance you're going to fail. Like, I hate to say it, there's empathy there, but there's, you need at least 3 people. Let's just get to the chase. And we have the answers. We've seen this. We see what works. A lot of times I like to say is people have to like you. I hate to say that. It's unfair. There's an injustice of the universe. You can't be an a-hole and get ahead. It's just not going to happen. You might get somewhere, but it's not going to get you much. And I think once you do that and you have that systematic approach, if you will, that holistic component where you have subject matter expertise, and you're able to analyze if someone just has certain inefficiencies due to capital constraints, then that's why we cut you a check, right? Like, you've proven to me that you can get this done, you have traction, you have customers, you validate it, but you need a little bit of money to buy that extra whatever you need, CNC machine and whatnot. With regards to what the DoD can do, radically honest with you, move more quickly. Like, seriously, nobody has the time in the startup world to wait 3 years for a contract. It's just never going to happen. And so a lot of times our success, frankly, has been because we have more patience, deeper pockets, and some wisdom, and we're gluttons for punishment. We have those 3 years to wait to basically sell something to you, which leads to a lot of joint ventures and joint developments. If you learn something from me today, learn the word joint venture. It's going to make your life so much easier. But I think key joint ventures have been our success to be able to work with the DoD, because at the end of the day, we have to be able to outlast the sales cycle. So I think between the sales cycle and some of the other challenges, frankly, have been most people don't know what the heck it is that we do for a living. Sometimes people just think we cut a check, but it's not true. We cut you a check, and we provide additional resources to help you succeed, because I don't make any money if you go bankrupt. So I need to make sure you win. So to me, the more quickly you can power us up to adapt to the mission, to the win condition, give us the appropriate visibility, if you will, so that we know what we're doing, and then give us the platform so that we can communicate with you, I think that would be tectonic. At the end of the day, we can all win on our own merit, but the truth is, if we can be in the same room with you guys and not have to pay, for example, $1,000 to attend a conference and $5,000 to get a booth and another $3,000 in hotels, that money goes by really fast when you're a startup. And those seriously would be huge things to help assist with being present at the moment of relevance with the proper stakeholders, as well as being able to move at the velocity of relevance, because otherwise, frankly, only the people with deep pockets are going to win. And they're not always the best ones, just to be brutally honest with you. This is coming from a guy who has deep pockets, but that's not my money's. Who I work for.
So often success is really informed and defined by the metrics that are being tracked, right? Because those are the metrics that inform the behaviors that then lead to whatever the results are. So Matt, you've worked on both sides, right? You know, you're all too familiar with measures of effectiveness, measures of performance from a naval perspective, and now on the outside, looking at a different set of metrics. How do you and how should we on the inside reconcile the delta between those sets of metrics in order to achieve mutual gains, shared objectives, and really achieve the shared objective on behalf of our warfighters?
It's a great question. You know, I think one of the comments I made earlier, I think, is really applicable here, which is that for any time we work with industry and DoD, essentially side by side, the less we can have a preconceived notion of exactly what we need, the better off we're going to be, because that'll really help us really work collaboratively to find what are those MOPs and MOEs that we really want to establish. So it's essentially outcome-based and not measuring against some metric of, you know, the thing that we sort of envisioned in our head of exactly what we needed. And sometimes that is allowing essentially failing fast and iterating. But so it's this idea of walking away as much as we can from requirements-based capabilities. And those absolutely do have a place. We need requirements-based capabilities to build aircraft carriers, fighter planes, ships, submarines. Like, those things need to be very well thought out before you know, the first metal is laid down. But for things like software, for things like robotics, we need to have a different system. And this goes back to the idea of this sort of capabilities-based requirements. And so it's that interest and the willingness of DoD to kind of step away from, I don't need exactly this. I'm willing to share my problems and then try to come up with workflows collaboratively with industry, small or big. And I think, and then if industry really understood that, then they're not building what they think DoD needs, but, you know, doing it in partnership with one another. So I think for those, it's not necessarily having two separate sets of metrics between industry and DoD. It's actually coming together and building together in a partnership. Hey, what are the metrics we want to establish together for the success of this program?
Thank you. Alex, you work closely with the fleet. How do you balance the immediate operators' needs with the formal requirements process and acquisition timelines?
You don't. That's like it's mathematically not really going to be possible with the construct that we have today. From a PPB&E perspective and from a requirements generation perspective, right? And I've been in all sides of the acquisition, PPB&E, and requirement side of this business. And I'll use an acute example that is not universal, but is, I think, useful in this case. When we look at, let's say, robotic autonomous systems, and we look at the ability for those systems to do automated target recognition, right? That's a software-based capability, a computer vision-based capability, right? And so the warfighters are employing their systems, they're using their automated target recognition, and the adversary, you know, changes their vessel from looking like a gray, you know, maritime Navy vessel to looking like a pineapple, as a sort of silly example, right? The automated target recognition that we've developed, let's say, through a program of record based on a CDD and a standard JSONs requirement and was palmed for the normal way, no longer works, right, to find the adversary and to positively identify them to then potentially, you know, be part of a kill chain, right? And so the warfighter needs the ability to adapt to that, right, and to adapt to that at scale. And they can't wait 2 years for a POM process to invest in retraining the ATR, right? And so you've got to be able to leverage, I think, a more flexible version of requirements that creates the space to automatically adapt and to change to changing conditions on the battlefield, whether it's from the adversary or from the environment itself, and be able to operate at a tempo that matches the adversary's speed of change and to functionally do development at, you know, at the speed of war. And so, you know, using the processes and the timelines that we have will not, you know, allow us necessarily to adapt at that pace. Can we bend those processes? Can we adapt them? Can we modify them? Can we mature them? Can we change them? Absolutely, we can, and I think we should. And there's certainly a lot of intellectual, work and rigor that's going into, reforming PPB&E and reforming the defense acquisition system. And I think there's a lot of great ideas out there that can make it more adaptive to the sort of scenario that I just described, right? Which I'll readily admit is very different than a scenario in which you spend billions of dollars and you procure a capital asset that you intend to keep, afloat, let's say, for 20 to 30 years. And so that capital asset's going to be afloat for 20 to 30 years. And so it's not so much adapting that hull, let's say, of a ship, but adapting all of the sensors and all of the digital capabilities, the things that you can actually change in a matter of hours and days, and that's the software. So we need to be able to adapt to that sort of changing battlefield condition, and I think we can do it if we can make some reasonable changes to the processes and the systems that we have today. But in order to solve these sorts of problems, the 2-year PPB&E process for new capability and certainly the requirements process is going to take longer than any given E6 or any given O3 or O5 on the battlefield can stand. Thanks.
I want to thank you three for fielding my questions. At this point, we're going to open it up to you all in the audience. So please come up to the mic here, fire away.
Piggyback.
Yeah.
While we wait for the first brave soul, I'm going to just piggyback on one thing Alex spoke about. When we started this project Pathmaker, the first theory of the case is when Admiral Gilday and we were flying away from Silicon Valley, and there was some frustration with venture and some innovative companies that DoD was hard to work with. And his comment was, we've been blaming PPBE for a long time as this is the problem of why we can't move faster. And I bet I have a lot more authorities than we're using to move faster. And so I think there is a part that's inside of DoD that it's a recognition that we do a lot of things because it's just the way that we have done them. And so when we can't move fast enough, for some folks, it's just a matter of finding out, is this a policy problem or a law problem? If it's a policy problem, we absolutely have leadership right now inside the Navy that is more than willing to change that policy so we can move faster. But it requires folks inside the requirements process, inside the acquisitions process, to be willing to elevate that to senior leadership. And certainly, Admiral Skillman is here in the audience with some head nods. We can move faster. The policy should not be what's getting in the way. There is flexibility inside the system, and there's eagerness from leadership to make the system move faster.
Thanks for that, Matt. Yep.
Hi, Captain Dave Kuhn, part of that acquisition system with all the perverse incentives against going fast. Since there's no one behind me, I have 2 questions. One, as we think about RDT&E, where we are punished if we don't expend 55% in the first year, but we're talking about going to firm fixed price contracts, OTAs, where expenditures will tend to lag much further behind. How have you overcome some of that so that we can keep the money flowing and going after the goodness? It's sort of like the opposite problem of the venture capitalist, of aligning our financial system to the needs. And the second question is, how do you think about the risk of vendor lock and intellectual property concerns that we often worry about in the tech sector? Because if we get an innovative solution, you want to have guarantee that we're going to go to you, but we're also afraid that we'll be locked in and not be able to bring in other people, and so we get stuck there.
Yeah, I got it. So on the OBS and expenditures, right? I'm familiar with that pain firsthand. So what we often do is we structure our contracts such that we pay on deliverable, such that we obligate and then expend almost in the same swing. That isn't a cure-all, but that's one mechanism to sort of get after that lag of obligating heavy at the beginning and then waiting for the trickle to come in. Because if they don't get you on OBS, they'll get you on expenditures, right? I'm familiar with the recapitalization and someone's got to pay for Columbia. So I'm here for it, right? And that's fine. The intellectual property piece, like we talk about this a lot too. And so special purpose data rights are something that I think we could become sort of more attuned to working with, because I think there's actually a pretty flexible field there. And so this idea that it's like, completely industry owned IP and we're locked, or it's GPR or like unlimited rights, right? Those are two ends of a sort of two ends of a spectrum, right? And I think there's more trade space in the middle. And I think incentivizing PMs and contracting teams to look at this, like again, like Matt was saying, things that we already have in terms of authorities and policies, and things that are in the FAR, right, that we can use, and we've had, I think, some success with that. The other thing I'll say especially on the data rights piece, is that we can use data rights to actually create a competitive landscape, I think, or a more competitive landscape, in that we basically say the government's going to own the interfaces, right? Happy to partner with industry to create the interfaces. We're going to own the architecture, happy to partner with industry to create the architecture, right? And ideally a broad base of industry. And then the government's going to own its own data. And the government should probably pay for, like, let's say, the labeling of its data, the engineering of its data. And we should eat that cost so that we continue to own the sort of, the output of that data work. And those are the things that are sort of foundational to what we own from an IP perspective. And then we, I think, create an opportunity for a business model in which companies develop capability and they develop licenses on top of those architectures, interfaces, and with the data that we essentially provide them access to, let's say, in a secure gov cloud environment, right? Ideally with all the modern tooling that comes in commercial cloud, ideally, is the key word there. And then I think that creates a business model in which I can go buy licenses from company A for 2 years, but keeps that sandbox sort of living so that other companies can build in that same space and prototype in that same space. And I can essentially just stop buying licenses from company A because company B provides essentially a differentiated, better capability. And so if I can structure my contracts that way and structure my act strategy that way, from the digital tech side, I think you're in a pretty good spot. There's no cure-all, right?
To the first part of the question, in terms of the RDT&E obligations, I would offer that one opportunity lies in having a backlog of relevant tech that is ready to go after, so that if a program office is sitting on funds and those funds need to be applied, and RDT&E is 2-year funding, right? So if we need to get those obligations met within the first year, and there are requirements, formal requirements that must be met, there is an opportunity to tap into these robust databases of tech that is ready to go from partners that have already been vetted and are viable and are ready to play with us.
One other piece, I think the warfighter feedback part is a really critical part of it. So I think sometimes we default to the perspective of we really need to get this thing to 80, 90% before we put it in the hands of the warfighter because they need to have it be operationally ready. And I think we're really at a time now where we can start shifting that focus, where I think it's actually okay. The warfighter generally at this point, we talk about sort of the risk seesaw. We're trying to drive down acquisition risk, but warfighter is assuming a lot of that risk. And so by rebalancing this a little bit and assuming some more acquisition risk at the front end, I agree on the competition point, maintain the competition. And I think it's valuable to just get the prototypes in the hands of the warfighters faster, let them iterate on it. And so I think it solves two things there. Is one, we rapidly get capabilities there, they can iterate on it, and yet you've still not closed the competition down to a sole source, so that another year or two, if another company comes along and says, I have built a better mousetrap, they can compete in that. I think that's the environment we're trying to create, which is that faster iteration, keeping competition alive, but incentivizing companies to go out there and work with warfighters.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Noam. Thanks all of you for being here. Tony Schwartz, I'm with Armada. We do edge compute. 2 questions. One is, with the new administration, are you getting any kind of indicators that might hint toward some kind of true rapid acquisition modifications? Bit of an oxymoron in many respects, but wondering if you're seeing anything on that front. And then Alex, for you, if you could help me and maybe others, just help us understand a little bit about where DIU's budget is at and what's left for it, at least as much as you can talk about it. I know you got $1 billion, and that was authorized back in April of last year. Not a lot of time to spend that. Just curious where that's at and whether or not anything besides Replicator is getting attention.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Who wants the new admin?
So, yeah, so
You got it?
I'll offer that. In terms of the administration, I think it's still a little early in terms of any significant changes that we're seeing. With every new administration, we know that we can expect some review of existing policies and procedures, and then we have to be ready, nimble, and adapt with any of those changes. And I think that DIU, NavalX, and the rest of the innovation cells across the services are actually really uniquely and well positioned to adapt to those changes and then help the rest of the enterprise in understanding what those changes look like, how they affect us, and how we can test them out to ensure that we're still meeting our commitments to the warfighters. Turn it over to Alex for the second part there.
Yeah, so on the budget question, we got a mix of congressional intent and directed language, all of which is public, right? And then we were also allocated a congressional ad to support the I think it was non-traditional innovation fielding enterprise was what it was called, and then also the support to combatant commanders lines. And those last two were effectively budget activity 6.8, and then there was a special caveat authority that enabled those resources to be used for essentially RDT&E procurement and O&M type purposes, right? It was pretty broad, so that's a fancy way of saying it was basically colorless money, but still on a 2-year time horizon because it was 6.8. All of those resources are effectively committed. And we're in the process of working through the obligations to catch up with OSD obligation benchmarks. Just as like we talked about, a second ago, it is mathematically difficult to do that across the range of prototype projects that we're doing. When you receive the funds in the sort of April or May timeframe, right? You're digging out of a hole. I think we're well on our way to breaking the surface of digging out of that hole, and focusing on really more towards expenditures now, and then working very closely with OSD and with Congress to work through continuing resolution allocations as we look towards the potential for a similarly sized budget when we do have a fiscal year 25 appropriation. But I don't have a crystal ball to tell you what's going to be in the FY25 appropriation, only what we've seen in the marks.
Thanks, Tony. We've got time for one more question. Yep.
Amazing. Thank you so much. No political questions here, but we talked a little bit about the dispersion of funds and how young companies need to go out and talk to NavalX, they need to go talk to DIU, they need to go talk to ONR, so on and so forth, to kind of get a better picture of how to approach the market. Specifically with respect to DIU, are there any contingencies or boundary entry steps that need to happen prior to those companies entering? Is there some sort of a formal commercialization that needs to happen prior to entry, or is it for these kind of OTAs for development and prototyping? How does that kind of work? If you could paint a better picture of that.
You have to have a bank account. That's usually pretty important. If you want the government to send you money, I'd start with that, to be frank. That's not always the case. But a more serious answer that answer is also true, but a more serious answer would be, so we have a dedicated commercial operations team that exists to do nothing. And we also have the National Security Innovation Network, which is a component of DIU. And those organizations exist to essentially sit down with you, because every company is case by case, every capability is case by case, every piece of tech is case by case, right? There's no sort of one size fits all pathway to work with DIU or to work with NavalX. And like I said, we all have different sort of tools in our toolbox. But if you go to diu.mil, you should be able to find a link to email our commercial ops team. And the way that we're organized is by sort of different tech silos. Well, not really tech silos, but tech areas. And there's dedicated commercial ops teams within each one of those different tech areas. And they can help you sort of work through the specifics of your company, your tech, your capability, and ideally provide you with some sense of what the warfighter need landscape looks like. Because DIU doesn't do projects on cool tech. DIU ingests like actual warfighter problems, either from, let's say, a fleet, or from a program manager, or in partnership with a resource sponsor. And then we try and find pair tech to that problem, not the sort of find tech and then pair it to a problem. Although, like I said, we all have different tools, and I think across the Navy innovation ecosystem, to include NavalX, to include DCO, can help you navigate that to some degree.
So I know we're at time. It's been a great conversation here. I want to thank the panelists. For those who are going to be walking the floor, if you want to continue the conversation, NavalX does have a booth, 4619. Shameless plug, you can also check us out at www.usnavalx.com, and I'll open that up. Any shameless plugs for websites or how to connect with you all?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Matt Culp, and Vannevar Labs is vannevarlabs.com, VANNEVAR labs.com. Thanks.
You can also find me on LinkedIn, Dijon Salgado, as well as R3 Experiential. We're always accepting applications for new ideas.
Thank you all. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. On behalf of U.S. Naval Institute and AFC International, I'd like to thank all of the panelists today for their insights in this discussion, and for you for attending and the questions that you've asked. As far as a shameless plug goes, I'll get one of my own. I am the director of Naval Institute Press, and we would like to give away a copy of the book to each of the panelists, Countering China's Great Game, A Strategy for American Dominance by Michael Sobolik. So thank you all, and have a
you.
great afternoon.